Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and Beyond. Our guest today is a children's book author. One of her latest books, Codebreaker Spy Hunter, helps both children and adults like us learn a little bit more about the importance of women in STEM.
What I love about this book is she was not a scientist as a kid. She was interested in literature and languages. And it goes to show that we're back to that idea of pigeonholing kids too early. If we had pigeonholed her, we would not have had this amazing codebreaker who truly was outstanding in her field. She broke the Enigma code just like Alan Turing did over in Europe, and after that it was all history.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And as I introduced in the intro, we have a guest that's back again to talk about her work as a children's book author. She has a mission to bring real-life stories that help children see and learn from women in STEM.
I'm Laurie Wallmark. I'm a children's book author, and until just recently, I had 5 children's books out about women in STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. These are picture books. And then I took a little 90-degree turn, little math there, to a children's book called Dino Pajama Party. But next year, I'm back to my women in STEM again.
Some listeners of Lab Out Loud might recognize Laurie's voice from the last time we talked to her. Almost 2 years ago, we talked to her about the books she was creating back then, one in particular which talks about an amazing person, Hedy Lamarr. If you haven't heard about Hedy Lamarr, go back and check out that episode. She was an amazing woman. But before we talked about some of the new women in STEM that Laurie's books introduce us to, we had a conversation about STEM itself and its definitions and how it's seen.
I often also think sometimes there's a pure versus applied aspect to STEM fields as well, that the applied piece is the most important of maybe a career-bound kind of a study versus studying something for the sake of studying it, like as in a pure science or something like that. Do you get that sense too, or is that?
I absolutely agree with you. A lot of the fiction STEM books are all of be a maker type books. You can do this, you can build this, you can invent that, and these are great books and they're great to inspire children. But you're right that there's no emphasis on learning these subjects with no idea that there might be an output at the other end.
Or sometimes, even as we've talked to a lot of scientists on the show, they don't necessarily know the output.
Exactly. You're doing your research, you're trying things out, and you just keep trying.
What would you say to a listener, or let's say member of the community, though, that says, well, what's the point of learning STEM then if you can't make something out of it or produce something out of it,
or get a job in this field? Or
why not? Why study STEM? Don't we have STEM to make for careers?
Well, I'll take the first part of the question first, of what's the point if you don't get something out the other end. It's what you said earlier. You don't know. You have no idea where research might send you. And ideas that you think of and discover now, mathematical concepts that are figured out now, how they might end up, being in engineering, for example. So that's the first part of the question, that you just don't know. So, and so many things that are studied don't come to fruition right then. But later on, they're used. As far as getting a job, I think it's a little much to ask kids in elementary school to really think about, will this lead to a job? I think they should be exploring all sorts of things and finding what they love and not putting any barriers to loving STEM. because I think there's a lot of barriers sometimes.
Like what?
I actually have a whole talk I give about encouraging children to embrace STEM. You have stereotypical expectations, obviously, that if you're a girl or of a certain race or from a certain place, that you're not going to be good at STEM. So that's one of them.
Obviously, do you have that in the back of your head when you are writing books, specifically having a woman in the forefront so that girls can see themselves as mathematicians?
Absolutely, but also so that boys can see girls as mathematicians.
Oh yeah, we don't talk about that side of it.
Right, that becomes a problem when you get to the workforce, that the men need to understand that, yes, women can also be mathematicians or scientists or whatever. So that's one of the problems. Another problem is money. Just there's not enough money to do everything that needs to be done in schools. And if schools can't afford adequate roofs or ventilation, they're not going to have the money to bring in a scientist to show how cool science is and the exciting things that science has gotten us, right? So that's another one. Mm-hmm. Another one is, science and math, that's only for nerds. And I don't know about the two of you, but I wear my nerd badge proudly.
Absolutely.
You want to call me a nerd? I'm all for it. But I'm also not 8.
Right.
Yeah. And not everybody sees STEM as exclusive to nerds too. I mean,
right.
A lot of people look at it being very, very cool, I guess.
But it's back to the T and the E, the technology and the engineering are cool. Mm-hmm. Is the math cool?
Well, it can be.
Not as much.
So if you were to approach STEM, you as in somebody out there, was to approach STEM as in kind of limiting yourself to the sort of the production consumerism mindset, then if you limit that, then you're missing out on the potential pathways that you didn't go down for sheer exploration.
And for fun.
Because that is part of the human experience, for one. Some may argue, well, why study something that you don't know the answer to when you have these other things you can study that are knowns? Like, why not start on known pathways? And I think you kind of answer the question, but correct me if I'm wrong. Your answer was sort of like, well, many of those come to fruition. They produced a whole area that we just didn't see coming. Exactly.
And there are new areas of study all the time, and some of the older areas, some of the math can fold into that. Mm-hmm. Some of the science can fold into that.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you by any chance know of any story in which that was the case, where it was a pathway of pure exploration that led to unpredicted benefits?
Well, I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that quantum computing, right? When we learned about quantum mechanics, there certainly was not any real use for it. If anything, it was the opposite. It went against everything we knew in the real world. So not only was there no use, but it was almost a negative use. And now we have quantum computers.
I never even thought of that. There's even that side of things where you can, not only are you going on a path that isn't like, it's an uncharted path, you're going to get one that's, uphill.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that you mentioned some of the barriers to STEM, and what we're seeing a lot now is like you said, funding, and somewhat interest too, because I think there's a tendency to not have as much rich offerings in the STEM fields, at least in schools, because you may not have the funding for it, like you mentioned. But as Dale mentioned too, I think sometimes there's such a pressure to produce a career out of this learning, more so than I felt when I was in school, that you could learn something and kind of discover what you like and enjoy it just for the sake of enjoyment. But I feel like there's, again, such a pressure to say, well, we need to show the community that we're training our students for being productive in society. And most often that means in a career-based setting. Oh, yeah, we talk about being successful in life too, but we really want them to be productive, tax-paying citizens. And
I do think we're asking kids at a younger age. Yes, I knew from a very young age, I loved math, I loved science. If there had been one of these science math charter schools available to me, without a doubt, I would have gone to it. So instead I went to these Saturday science programs, and in the summers I went to programs funded by the National Science Foundation.
Sure.
So I did know what I wanted. I did know my interest, but not all kids do. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we're funneling earlier and earlier into a specific career.
Right.
That, as you said, the kids have not had a chance to experience a wide variety to see, oh, maybe I would like this. Maybe I would like that. Maybe I would like the other thing.
I was just at an elementary school where sixth graders had their pictures up on the hallway, and underneath it was what they want to be when they grow up. And so there was the slew of doctors and lawyers. There was someone who wanted to be an NFL kicker. You got a dreamer too.
Was there a YouTuber, an influencer, and that kind of stuff?
Well, no, but there was one kid that said undecided, and I'm like, hey,
good for you.
I'd like to have an undecided kid. I think back to the movie Uncle Buck, where you want a dreamer, you want a lollygagger. That's part of being a kid.
When I was still teaching, I taught computer literacy at the college level. And I don't know how it came up, but it came up, basically, what do you want to be? And easily half of the class, they wanted to be YouTube influencers.
Yep.
Yes.
Because that's what they see. They see the unicorn person who's making all this money. It's like being the NFL quarterback.
Yeah.
Same thing. Chances are you're not going to be a YouTube unicorn. That's true too.
It probably exists.
A YouTubicorn.
YouTubicorn.
But that's what they see. And at a younger age, they see even fewer. They do see doctors. And they don't see lawyers, but they see them on TV. They see teachers. They see nurses. These are great careers. Uh-huh. But they don't see as many artists unless they're brought into the school. Right. Why would they see an artist? Why would they think about being an author unless these people are brought into the schools?
Sure.
So you have 2 new books out, Numbers in Motion and Codebreaker, Spy Hunter.
Right.
And these are, again, to females in STEM, particularly math. What can you tell us about these 2 books?
Okay, so the first one, The Numbers in Motion, this isn't part of the math, but what's interesting about the story is she was Russian. She loved math, just like I did, just like many, many kids do, wanted to study more, knew at the time, which was the mid-1800s, that she had to go to Germany. That was the center of mathematical study. She could only leave Russia with either a father or a husband. So she had a sham marriage, and she got out of Russia. And I do mention it in the story, but I don't get into the details of a sham marriage with the elementary school group. But she could not attend classes. I can't remember now which school did which, but in one school, she could attend classes, but she couldn't get credit, right? So she couldn't get a degree. And another one, she couldn't even attend classes. So the professor would repeat the lectures for her so she could learn from him.
Oh, wow.
Right? So we've come a long way from that. It just shows how much she really wanted to learn math, and that she solved this problem that no one seemed to have been able to solve is amazing. So that's Sophie. And then with Codebreaker Spy Hunter, what I love about this book is she was not a mathematician as a kid. She was not a scientist as a kid. She was interested in literature and languages. And it goes to show that we're back to that idea of pigeonholing kids too early. If we had pigeonholed her, we would not have had this amazing code breaker who truly was outstanding in her field. She broke the Enigma code just like Alan Turing did over in Europe, but they didn't know that the other had done it. So we hear about Alan Turing, but we never hear about her. But she was not a mathematician. She just had this amazing mind, and it became she obviously had a mathematical mind. She just didn't have the interest in it as a child. She grew to love it, of course, and it became her profession. So I really like that one because it's showing, sort of like my Hedy Lamarr book, that you can be glamorous and beautiful and act in movies and also be really smart. In this case, Hedy always had the interest in math and science. Elizabeth Friedman didn't. But when she started on this path, she had been hired to prove that Shakespeare had not written his plays, that Sir Francis Bacon had. And this all involved code breaking. She didn't prove that because it doesn't seem to be true, but it got her interest in code breaking. And after that, it was all history. She and her husband set up the first code breaking unit in World War I for the military. She set up the code breaking unit for what's now the CIA. And no one's heard of her.
How did you select her? How did you hear of her first?
I keep this running list of possible people to write about. And then the joke is that I write about dead women in STEM. So whenever someone dies, people send me the obituary. Laurie, this is someone you might want to write about.
Oh, really? People are actually sending?
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's funny.
As soon as I'll get like 20 emails the day a mathematician or a scientist dies. But this person, it was...
It's a weird alert system.
Dead mathematician alerts.
It works.
Hey.
Yeah.
But for Elizabeth, I had read a book written by Jason Fagone called The Woman Who Smashed Codes. So it's a nonfiction book for adults about Elizabeth Friedman. And I read that book and it was like, this woman's story needs to be told. And not only have I told her story, but a book is coming out for older kids called The Woman All Spies Fear by Amy Butler Greenfield.
Ooh, that's a good title.
Yes, because that's what she was known as. So now we have books for the younger kids, and if they get interested in it, there will soon be this book for the older kids. But truly, once I read the adult book, it was like, yeah, I'm on this one. She's my next person.
In Codebreaker Spy Hunter, you actually have a code built into the artwork throughout the storyline. And yes. I noticed in Numbers in Motion that you have equations. Am I to assume that those equations are real, that are towards what I guess the problem that was being solved by Sophie in the book, or are they just window dressing equations?
So for Numbers in Motion, the illustrator did it all by herself, the illustrations. So my guess is she picked up equations here and there, but they're not really as specifically related to what Sophie did. In Codebreaker, I made the mistake. The illustrator, who is wonderful, Brooke Smart, and the illustrator for Numbers in Motion is Yevgenia Neighborg, and she's also great. But Brooke Smart put these ribbons around a lot of the pictures and just put random letters in there. And I made the mistake of saying, we should put coded messages in those letters. And this was a mistake because, of course, I had to provide the coded messages. That wasn't a problem. Checking all those letters, I am still convinced there's some 10-year-old out there who's going to come up to me and said, you made a mistake on this one.
And you can say, yes, I did. I was waiting for the smartest
Yeah, there you go.
person
The
to figure that
plan
out.
Right. So on the second book, that was me adding that into the artwork.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like the
stuff.
artwork in that piece there. That you've got a little story within a story within a story almost, or at least a task within the story.
And in the back matter, there's a section called Crack the Code, which if kids read that, then they can crack the code of the ribbons, because I use the same code.
Yeah, in all your books, you seem to have a little bit at the end for the readers, maybe a little bit more about the subject. You have like an author's note in Numbers in Motion or a timeline. What prompted you to put some of that in there?
Interestingly enough, in Codebreaker Spy Hunter, Crack the Code was going to be in there. Timeline, if it's a biography, you almost always have a timeline.
Sure.
Glossary, I wanted to make clear some of the words that are used in Codebreaker. But what was not from me, I wrote it, but I did not originate it, was Codebreaking Today. The publisher came back and said, librarians are going to want to know what the field is like today, because when Elizabeth Friedman did it, she did it without computers.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I added a whole nother section. Back matter is, we people who write nonfiction, we love writing back matter. We would make half the book back matter.
Sure.
Footnote.
Well, have you ever thought about putting at least a suggested reading list for librarians that want to, I guess, build out like a repertoire around a book? I think that might be an interesting way to go, because a lot of times we see, here is a book, but how can we build interest beyond just this book?
Actually, for several of my books, I have other books about women in STEM, a suggested reading right in the book about other women in STEM. Part of the problem is space in a picture book. Codebreaker Spy Hunter, they gave me 48 pages, which is almost unheard of. And even then, I was cramming things into corners, trying to get it all in there.
Okay. What I also like about this, we've been talking obviously about STEM careers and thinking about like people that are need a little bit more representation in their field, and
right.
It strikes me as you are one of these people as well. You are a science communicator, and even with our discussion about the YouTuber, like we need people who can communicate their field better, especially in STEM fields there. So did you see this as a path for yourself?
Not at all. This is actually my fourth career, because I started as a software engineer, or back then I was a computer programmer, different name, same job. Then I had a mail order bookstore. I actually had a bookstore on the web before Amazon did. I sold books about adoption and infertility.
Oh, yeah. I remember you told us about this. That's right.
Then I taught computer science, and now I'm writing books for children. But I also, like I say, I give talks about encouraging children's interest in STEM. The talk I just gave, I mentioned before we started, I had given a talk virtually to South Africa on Friday, and that talk was continuing the curiosity. You pique a child's interest with a picture book. Now what? Here are some books, if the child liked this book, then the child might be interested in a book on the same topic, and giving ideas for teachers and librarians. So I do speak a lot at professional conferences, to teachers, to librarians, to try and spread the word.
Mm-hmm. You have a few books out now, and they most have likely been used in classroom settings. Have you gotten any feedback about that?
Well, first off, all the books have curriculum guides, so it makes it easier for teachers to use in classroom settings because they can choose, I can use this book in a history lesson. You wouldn't think about it, but since I'm writing about dead women in STEM, it's history. It's that time period. I can use this book in an English class. Two of my books start with a poem in front. They could be used for a poetry lesson. So to get STEM just out of only in the science classes and only in the math classes, to get it through the other disciplines is how these books are starting to be used, which pleases me no end.
Good. Well, before we let you go, what's next?
Okay, so I have another, like I mentioned, Dead Woman in STEM next year. That's
hey, the dinos fall right along that line, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. That's my
Some of those dinos were women.
So next year I have A Passion for Science, Mariah Mitchell, astronomer. Then I go back to fiction with a picture book that takes place in 1918 on the Lower East Side. And the 1918 is important because of the 1918 flu and about a little girl who wants to go to school but can't because she has to stay home to take care of her sister because Papa's sick with the flu. After that, I've got two more women in STEM, and I can't even say dead woman in STEM because one of them is alive. When I tell my friends this, they're like, alive? You're writing about someone who's alive? But yes, but I can't give you more information about those. They haven't been announced yet.
Sounds good. We look forward to it.
Right.
Well, Laurie, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be on any show that is trying to spread interest about science and math.
We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.